Today we're going to talk about the very first cocktail ever created. It's called the Old Fashioned, and everyone knows how to make one, right? So you've probably never had a bad one at an airport bar or a wedding or a bowling alley. I bet you probably have. So let's talk about the three main ways that people mess up Old Fashions. The goal isn't to pick on any one bartender or specific venue. I imagine those bartenders were probably doing the best they could with the training they had. But nonetheless, these three pitfalls, or avoiding these three pitfalls, will help you make a really great or even world-class Old Fashioned at home. Let's learn how. So before we get into making the drink, let's talk about some of those pitfalls I mentioned. The first is small or wet ice. If you are using an ice bucket or an ice bowl, if you're kind of set up on a countertop and you're making drinks for a bunch of people using an ice bucket, that ice over time can start to melt. And although you may still have plenty of good ice in the bucket, the wetter it is, the more quickly your drink is going to be automatically diluted. And so with a drink like this that kind of follows that classic 1800s cocktail format of just spirit, sugar, bitters, and water, there's not enough really going on to be able to stand up to that level of dilution. So you really want to make sure you have clear, like a big clear ice cube, or if you don't have a clear cube, at least a big like 2" by 2" or 1.5" by 1.5" cube will go a long way to make this drink last a while and not be overly diluted the first sip you get. One of my favorite things about an Old Fashioned is that it's kind of a little bit too strong. A good one, I would say, is a little bit too strong whenever it's first served, and then it kind of passes through that window over a longer period of time. If it's already at its optimal sipping dilution when you first get it, then maybe you'd have to kind of drink it quicker, or you would end up with a drink that by the time you're done with it would be really over diluted. So it's kind of like whenever you get a fresh cup of coffee, you want it to be almost a little bit too hot, or else you've got to switch into gulping mode, and it's not great for coffee, and it's really not great for an Old Fashioned. The second pitfall, I would say, is actually just low proof whiskey. This one kind of goes hand in hand with the ice problem or the dilution problem, but you're making a different choice when you're deciding what whiskey you want versus what ice you want. So I think it's a second category. And I have a couple whiskeys here. One is a 90 proof bourbon. One is a little bit over 100 proof single malt that uses a lot of virgin oak or first use oak in the barrel profile. So it gives you a lot of that oak intensity like a bourbon would. And so 90 proof is probably as low as I would recommend going for making an Old Fashioned. And then going up to maybe a bonded bourbon or even a cask strength bourbon from there can be great options too. I like starting with 90 proof because it's going to be stronger than what you might find at a dive bar well whiskey, but it's not quite as intense as a cask strength or a bonded bourbon. So it gives you kind of room to move up in the category. If you're already familiar with a 90 proof bourbon, or you have a favorite that's 100 proof or higher, then I would certainly use that. I know Wild Turkey has that 101, which is kind of infamously one louder. That one's kind of fun too. The whole idea with the Old Fashioned is that you're basically chilling, diluting, and slightly sweetening the base spirit. And while you could probably stretch that idea to round out all cocktails that exist, the difference in something in an Old Fashioned versus like a paper plane, something that uses like Amaro and Aperol and lemon juice, is that there's just not as much to stand behind. And so dilution, I would say, is even more important in this drink than some others. And the third pitfall, I would say, is fruit salad. And this one is probably going to cause some debate with the TGI Friday lovers out there, but you do not need a whole slice of orange like a kid's soccer game in your Old Fashioned. If you're muddling up whole fruit, you're going to get this like strange kind of pulpy consistency. I think maybe Don Draper would disagree with me too, but I think that just the citrus rind, just that little bit of swath of orange with the citrus oil expressed over the top is all the fruit you need. If you really want to spear a nice high quality maraschino cherry, that's great too. Stay away from the bright neon red cherries. I don't know if y'all know, but those are bleached and then artificially colored, and then they add like an almond syrup back to them. There's nothing about those that it resembles a cherry anymore. Great for a sundae, not great for an Old Fashioned. So let's get into making these Old Fashions. I'm going to grab 2 glasses from the freezer, and then I'm going to build both of them right next to each other. Same spec for the 2 of them, but we'll have 2 different whiskeys with different strengths. And so we'll kind of talk about how they compare and contrast once they're fully built. All right, so I've got my 2 glasses fresh out of the freezer, and I have a large clear cube in each one. Here's the clear ice for you viewing at home. And let's build them next to each other, and then we'll stir them up pretty close to the same time, and we'll be able to taste both of them. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the bitters. I always like to put the bitters directly over the cube. I kind of think it just looks pretty to see the strong hue of this kind of brownish red color over the top of the cube. So we'll do 3 in each one. Oh, I didn't mention, this is Angostura bitters. You can use a different kind of aromatic cocktail bitters if that's what you have, but Angostura is kind of the king with an old fashioned, I would say. Then we've got some fresh semi-rich syrup. That means 1.5 parts sugar to 1 part water. I'm going to be doing a 1/4 ounce of this semi-rich syrup in each one. One there and here. And then we'll add the whiskey. I will keep the Dickel bourbon, this 90 proof 8-year-old Dickel bourbon here on the left, and I'll keep our Balcones Texas 1 single malt here on the right. To be clear, this isn't a competition between the two. It's just to show 2 different whiskeys at 2 different strengths and how they kind of present in this cocktail format. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. All right, so cocktails are basically built. I'm going to stir each one. The Dickel, as I was pouring it, has this like really fun kind of banana character to it. Maybe not as banana-y as some wheat whiskeys, but there was a kind of a banana candy quality that was coming out as I was pouring it. And because I'm building this one in the glass and that ice cube is going to stay in there, I do want it to be chilled. So my first sip is chilled, but it doesn't actually have to be fully diluted. It can kind of do that over time, like I mentioned. I am going to rinse the spoon in between though. I'm friends with enough science types that they would have called me on my little comparison experiment here if I didn't rinse the spoon. And so, yeah, same principle when I'm stirring here. I'm still keeping the back of the spoon to the outside sections of the glass, inside of the glass, but you know what I mean. And then to finish this off, I will garnish with some orange peel. I'm not going to do a cherry today, but if you want to do a cherry at home, like I said, be my guest. Orange here. And orange here. So let's try the 90 proof bourbon old fashioned first. Certainly get the orange on the aroma. You can smell the bitters. Yeah, that one's really nice. Once again, I mentioned 90 proof is about as low as I like to go. That one is at just maybe a little above an optimum sipping dilution, but it's really close to that window. So yeah, the orange character is kind of the first thing that pops out. It was the last ingredient in the glass, and so it's right on top for the aroma. As it's already kind of starting to dilute a little bit, and the orange kind of mellows out. If you smell it a couple times, your senses kind of push past that first top note into what else is going on in the glass. And so there's kind of some like apple and there's some tree fruits and peach going on. It's really nice. Yeah, honestly, a really fruity bourbon. I'm kind of surprised for most Kentucky bourbons. This one's a Tennessee bourbon, but most Kentucky bourbons, they kind of have that like oak and leather punch. And then maybe there's like a little bit of a cherry character or sometimes bubblegum. I don't really get any bubblegum in this one. There's like a little bit of a Flintstones vitamin character I often get with Dickel bourbon or Dickel Tennessee whiskey, and that's certainly present here, although it's a little bit more subdued. I think maybe because it's an 8-year-old whiskey, some of the oak tannin is kind of shining through. All right, so now let's try the Texas single malt old fashioned. Yeah, the first thing I notice in comparison is actually a sort of a chocolate character. And so with the bourbon old fashioned, or really with bourbon in general, 100% of the barrels that are used have to be new oak. They have to be the first time that that freshly charred oak vessel was being used to make a whiskey. Whereas this one, the Texas single malt, it uses mostly new oak, but has the ability to use some used oak as well, because the category of single malt, as it's still being defined, it doesn't actually require new oak. So yeah, because an old fashioned is such a kind of transparent cocktail that really lets the whiskey character shine through, even though I built these identically and right next to each other, they're super different. I would say overall, the bourbon old fashioned, the Dickel 8-year-old old fashioned, has a broader fruit character to it, whereas I'm getting more toffee, chocolate, and maybe some pear present in the Texas single malt one. So yeah, these are both really great old fashions. I'm honestly kind of surprised by how fruity they both are. I expected the fruitiness out of the single malt. I try that one regularly, and I'm used to that kind of pear and apple quality that comes out here. I think because the Dickel bourbon was so fruity, what shined through more in the Balcones Old Fashioned were some of the toffee and chocolate qualities that I get out of a lot of our different barrel aged intense expressions. Um, but as the great LeVar Burton said, don't take my word for it. I recommend trying this out at home, whether you have an Irish whiskey that you want to try, if you're going to go on the less oak intense side, or if you want to try it with a corn whiskey, or if you want to play with proof like I am. Obviously, I was playing with both proof and whiskey style, but trying a couple next to each other and maybe even sharing a couple with a friend is a great way to kind of look at your whiskey shelf a little bit differently if you get to try them in cocktail format. That's all for the Old Fashioned today. Thanks for joining me. Next week, we are going to talk about something really important to me, which is the Mai Tai. I am recently on a rum kick, tiki kick specifically, and the Mai Tai is kind of the grandfather of that world. So tune in next week and we'll check that out. At the end of the day, drinks are for fun. And my goal with this channel is to teach people enough so they can share that fun with the people they love. Come and be amazed at what you can do. Cheers.